Hello everyone. I think we'll just get started. So first of all, welcome to part 2 of Extending Your Business Boundaries. My name is Jason Nguyen. I'm a senior consultant with OBS and I'll be your presenter for today. So just some quick housekeeping before we begin. This presentation will run for approximately 40 minutes. There'll be a Q&A session towards the end. So if you do have any questions, in the meantime, please IM them using your GoToMeeting console, and we'll tend to them once we finish the presentation. So just a quick look at the agenda of what we're going to be covering today. We're just going to spend a bit of time recapping on the previous webinar because this is part 2 of a 2-part series. For those that did attend the first webinar, you'll recall that we mostly talked about the business value of extranets. So I'd just like to take some time to just retouch on those main points and really reiterate the reasons for investing in an extranet. We'll then swing the focus onto Office 365 for the rest of the presentation as really a platform for delivering your extranet environment. In particular, we'll talk about where really the sweet spot is in terms of SharePoint 365, in terms of the workloads that you can put onto Office 365. We'll then do a quick demo of how we can use Nintex technology to push and sync information to and from Office 365 before finishing things off with a quick talk around the governance and authentication considerations you need to think about if you are going to invest in SharePoint in the cloud. So just recapping on some of the main points we talked about in the previous webinar, one of the main things that we talked about was really the speed of the information economy. What we're referring to there when we talk about the speed of the information economy is really the increasing pace of doing business. More and more so, businesses are being dependent on the availability of quality information. So in essence, when we talk about the speed of information, we're talking about how it's becoming increasingly important to really streamline the delivery of information to users both inside and outside of your organization. Because at the end of the day, efficient delivery of information means staff spends less time looking for information and more time utilizing that information. And really, when we start to think about it this way, it's really just a reflection of the times we're in. Today, we live in an information economy, but back when information was less critical to the running of businesses, they just streamlined other things that made sense to them and had the greatest business value. So, for example, Henry Ford used the assembly line to streamline the production of Model Ts. But now, as more and more companies and economies are dependent on the timely access to information, we're needing to streamline really the delivery of information in the same way that Henry Ford used the assembly line to streamline production. So inside the organization, we have the intranet to do this, but with an increased need to really collaborate with our partners and our clients, the extranet is really becoming the vehicle for streamlining that delivery of information. We also touched on in the previous webinar a recent GE report on innovation in which it basically had to say 80% of top executives agree that organizations need to innovate differently and that 86% say that partnerships and collaboration are the key to this. For innovation to flourish, we must embrace a new innovation paradigm that promotes collaboration between players, big, small, public and private, that fosters creativity. Now, the report later also underlines the importance of this type of innovation and this type of collaboration in a struggling economy where funds for research and development are hard to come by. Now, although the report never explicitly states that the use of an extranet in pushing this kind of innovation, we think it's clear that an extranet is really well placed as a vehicle to deliver that kind of collaboration and engagement from your partners. So really what we've said is that there's really two things that are highlighting the need for an extranet technology, and those two things are the speed of the information economy, driving the need to streamline the delivery of information to those that need it, And the second thing is the pursuit of innovation, leading to partnerships outside the traditional walls of the organization. So they're really the two underlying ideas that are driving the need for extranets. We also looked at in the previous webinar the different workloads or capabilities of SharePoint to see how we could really deliver on those two visions. So in particular, we looked at these workloads through the lens of delivering an extranet on Office 365. And we think it's important to do that because it's relatively easy to deliver a rich extranet experience if your environment is on-premise and you have full control of it. But when you're delivering an extranet on 365, there really is what we call a sweet spot in terms of the workloads that you should be using 365 for. Because the truth is, in its current state, 365 in its current form is not really ideal for all the extranet workloads that was in the previous slide. There are definitely some certain sweet spots where SharePoint in the cloud is a perfect fit in an extranet scenario, and the real standouts what we like to call light publishing and project-based collaboration. And we'll be defining and going through examples of each of these in the next couple of slides. So what do we mean when we say light publishing? When we say light publishing, basically what we mean is really providing a simple publishing portal where it's essentially a push mechanism. You as the authors is publishing the information onto the extranet, and then users consume it. So we're really talking about information like news and announcements, policies and procedures, forms, things like HR policies and IT policies. And we call it light publishing because this type of information or these assets are typically documents sitting on your on-premise installation of SharePoint. So typically they're sitting in your intranet. And what you really want to do is merely publish this content to 365 for external parties to consume. So let's look at a more realistic scenario where the business value in light publishing is more obvious. So let's just imagine that a hardware retail store like BRUNNINGS is coming into the Christmas period. Now, they know that this is a busy time of year because would-be handymen in the form of dads start taking on summer projects around the house that typically require at least 3 daily trips to the store. So BRUNNINGS, in understanding of this phenomenon, will bring on extra casual staff to service the extra traffic. But to comply with regulations, they need to provide these casual staff with the same access to HR and OH&S policies that their full-time staff do on the intranet. So really an extranet seems perfect for this, but in the scenario of BRUNNINGS, they don't really want to invest in a full-blown extranet as one thing, the IT department is already resource constrained, which is a common thing that we see with a lot of customers, and they're already struggling to maintain their core systems. The second thing is that the money just isn't there to invest in a full-blown extranet, and probably the most important thing is that the use is going to be seasonal, which means that once the summer holidays are over, dads return to work, many of the casual staffers' contracts will come to an end, and the extranet isn't really going to be used again until perhaps Easter when dads start to migrate towards BRUNNINGS again. So it's really in scenarios like these that the benefits of SharePoint on Office 365 really shine, because it's cost effective, as it's a subscription model where you pay for each user on a monthly basis, and you don't need to worry about licensing. The time to spin up is going to be vastly quicker than if you were to do it on-premise via your IT department. You can scale as required, so as you hire more staff and you need more staff to access that extranet, you can scale it to accommodate it. You don't have to worry about maintaining the underlying infrastructure. Microsoft will look after all that for you. And as I said before, as your needs change, you can scale back your subscription. So, in the example of Brunnings, come late January when dad traffic starts to taper off, Brunnings can scale back their subscription as less casual staff are required. So one slight problem that Office 365 does create, however, is that we end up with what we call these hybrid models, where we've got content sitting on our on-premise SharePoint intranet, and as a user, you'd like to push that content up into Office 365. So the question is, or the issue is, how do we get that content into 365, and how do we keep track of those assets, or how do we keep track of the assets that are in 365? Now, of course, you can manually do all this, but where we think this is where we really think third-party products like Nintex can really come into play. Now, before we go into the demo, I'd just like to fully disclose that OBS are a partner of Nintex, and there are other third-party products that do similar things, but we really do think that Nintex gives a pretty compelling solution, especially if you've already invested in Nintex workflow, because the ability to publish to 365 is done via a product called Nintex Live, which is actually a free addition if you've already invested in the enterprise version of Nintex workflow. Okay, so let's just hop into a demo. Just let me bring up my browser. And what we've basically got here is on the two tabs. On the first tab is our on-premise intranet. And on the second tab here, we've got our 365 instance. On our 365 instance, I've basically just set up a simple site with a document library with HR policies. So really the user scenario here is, imagine that I'm an HR staff looking through our HR policies and procedures, trying to figure out what it is that I want to push out onto the 365 instance. So I'm going to click into HR policies and procedures, and browsing through, I see that ethics and conduct is probably one of the policies that I want to push out onto the cloud. And so with Nintex Workflow, all I really need to do is simply click on the context menu, click on Workflows, and you can see I've already got a workflow set up here to upload to Office 365. Now I'm just going to click on that and start it, but once it gets going, we'll get back to having a look at the guts of what this workflow is doing. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on Upload to Office 365, and then click on the Start button. Okay. So now that workflow is clicked off, we can see in this Upload to Office 365 column that the workflow is in progress. While that is happening, because it can take a little bit of time, I'm just going to go into the guts of the workflow to show what it's actually doing. So clicking through to the Nintex edit canvas, we can see that it's really a very simple workflow. Nintex has really done all the hard work for us already. If you're not familiar with Nintex, all I've really done is set up an action here that comes out of the box with Nintex Live to upload a file to Office 365. And if I go into configure this particular workflow action, you can see, again, it's pretty straightforward. All I've done to configure it is to say the file to upload is the current item, so the file that the user has selected to upload, and I've put in the destination site URL of the Office 365 instance. I've told it to upload it to the HR policies document library, and I've simply told it to use the same name as the the name of the file on the intranet instance. I've told to overwrite any existing files with the same name, and under the credentials section, all I'm entering in here is credentials that have the ability to upload files into the 365 instance. And all I've done here is used a 365 account that has admin rights to that particular site. The next action in this particular workflow simply augments the list item for that document to put in a Office 365 link so that we know where that document is actually living in the 365 instance. And that's basically it. It's that simple. So if we go back to the HR Policies and Procedures document library, hopefully we can see that it's completed. Yes, it has. You can see that the workflow is completed. And you can also see that it's augmented that link to say that this particular document that's living on the intranet has been pushed up to Office 365 and it's living in this particular URL. If we hop over to the 365 instance and just do a refresh, hopefully we can see that that document has been uploaded to that document library. And there it is. So as you can see, an in-text workflow is a fairly simple yet powerful way to sync your information to the cloud. And together with Nintex Live, it gives a pretty compelling solution for scenarios like the one just shown. Now, before we go on, I just want to quickly show you this slide because the demo environments that I'm working on are admittedly quite plain Jane. So one of the main concerns that we hear our customers have with 365 is that it can't be really made to look, sexy. But this is a screenshot of the homepage of a real live intranet on 365 that Microsoft has basically created for demo purposes. And as you can see, it looks pretty nice. So rest assured, if you do want to apply your own branding and look and feel to your 365 instance, you can definitely do it. And the development experience is virtually no difference to how you would brand on an on-premise installation. So you'll recall that the other kind of sweet spot that we talked about for SharePoint in 365 is project-based collaboration. Now, unlike light publishing scenario where we talked about before, the use case for project-based collaboration is pretty much identical whether it's on-premise or in the cloud. So the typical characteristics of project-based collaboration is that it's a site created for collaboration within the context of a particular project. And these projects typically have a definite start and end time. During that lifetime, it's very high transaction, which means that there's lots of people uploading, updating, and reading documents and creating tasks and engaging in discussions. But once a project is complete, these types of transactions tend to cease. So some more concrete examples would be, for example, an IT services company like OBS that needs a collaboration space or a project space to collaborate with their clients on the SharePoint projects. That's a good example. Another example is, two property development companies joining together to work on a big tender response for a new estate. Perhaps there's a fashion label in Australia collaborating with a manufacturing company in China on designs and production of their garments, or even two or more research organizations collaborating on a pressing social issue. They're the type of scenarios that we would regard as project-based collaboration. So to go back to our Brunnings example and extend on it a little bit, Brunnings now wants to reduce their costs of doing business, as all businesses want to. And one area where they think they can really gain a lot of efficiencies is making their supply chain as efficient as possible. So they start a project to try and minimize the efficiencies in their supply chain. Now, they know themselves that they aren't experts in the area, so they partner with a logistics company. And the characteristics of the people working on this project is that they're all geographically dispersed. They're obviously working in separate organizations, and typically they'll be working on the project while they're not in their office. So without a collaboration tool like 365, typically people would resort to email. But rather than collaborating by email, they know that they want some kind of workspace to work in so that they can have discussions, assign tasks, collaborate on documents, and generally manage the project. So for this type of collaboration, 365 is really the ideal candidate. And the benefits of using 365 in this scenario is much the same reasons as why you would want to use 365 in a live publishing scenario. You can quickly provision sites, you can scale as required. The licensing model is very simple. More importantly, users don't need to VPN into a particular network. And the provisioning of your external users, so in the case of BRUNNINGS, the provisioning of LineFox users would be very, very simple. One thing that is often overlooked is that you can actually give access to users using live accounts, using Windows Live accounts. And there's also the ability to co-author documents, which means that more than one user at the same time can actually edit a document in real time. So some of the considerations in this scenario where we're using 365 for project-based collaboration is that how do we create these sites for users, or how do users create sites? Because typically you want a power user on your intranet to be able to create these sites. And then once it's created, again, how do we keep track of the sites that they have access, both for the internal users on your intranet and the external users on your extranet? For these type of questions, again, we're going to turn to an in-text workflow and in-text live. But this time we're going to use it to help us actually provision a project site in 365 and then keep track of the project sites that we have created. So I'm just going to turn to the demo environment again. And this time around, I'm just going to go to the root site in our 365 instance. You can see on this root site here, all I've done is created a project site directory, which is a custom list that is essentially going to show our 365 users a list of all the project sites available. On the intranet end, I've created another list that will prompt the user when I click on Add New Item. It will prompt the user for information about the site that they want to create. So think about, again, a user on the intranet that is ready to start a project that will require access for external parties. As a power user, they can simply go into here, click Add a New Item, and start filling in the required information. So the site name in this case, and we're going to extend on the BRUNNINGS example, is efficiencies in logistics. Site owner, I'm just going to make myself. Site purpose is logistics project. Set an expiry date so that for governance purposes we know when we should probably archive this site. And then a site URL which we don't need to put in because the system will automatically generate it for us. So I'm just going to hit save, and if I do a quick refresh, I should find now that the Create 365 project site workflow is now in progress. This one has been set up to automatically kick off once a new item has been created. So once again, that's going to take a little bit of time. So while we're waiting, let's just quickly hop into the guts of the workflow to see exactly what it's doing. again, as you can see, dead simple, just 3 actions to essentially create a new site in 365, set a field value on the intranet so that we know which sites have been created in the 365 instance, and then in the same manner create a list item in that project directory list that I just showed you before. If I go through and have a look at the configuration for this particular action, again, very simple. We're just taking variables from the list item, so we're taking the site name that was inputted by the user, the description, which again has been configured by the user, site owner likewise, parent site URL, which is a variable that is part of this particular workflow, which denotes the root site of your 365 instance, the site name, which comes from the user, and the actual template that you want to create the site on. Again, credentials that we need to provide, and then this time it's in this case it's the same user account, but this account has obviously the ability to create new sites in Office 365. So just hopping back to that 365 project list, hopefully that's finished. No, still in progress. We might just give it a bit of time and we'll come back and check on it a bit later. Okay, so just going back to the presentation. Now, another thing that we need to consider when we're creating project sites in 365 is really the governance around them. As I previously said, project sites should really only exist for the duration of the project. And this is really no different to the thinking that you should be having with your SharePoint intranet. If you're creating project sites in your intranet, they too should have a particular start and a particular end time. Once it isn't required, all the assets, all the information and the documents within the site should be moved out of the site and then put onto somewhere somewhere within your intranet that makes more sense. And so once all of those assets have been moved out, the site itself can be either archived or deleted. And this is important, particularly in the 365 instance, because there's limited amount of space that you can play with in 365. So it's really important that you do have good governance around your project sites and retire and archive them once you're finished with them. This, of course, will help reduce site sprawl as well. If we don't really want a user going into the project site directory and have a 100 list item of different projects that they can access. So having good governance around it will reduce your site sprawl. It also makes sure that the assets within those project sites are stored in the right place so that it becomes easier to find in the future. You don't really want to keep your documents in the project site and expect users to go to project sites to be able to find those documents again. Now, moving on to authentication, I mentioned before that one of the great things about 365 is really the choice of user provisioning and authentication. Now, for internal users, you probably want a single sign-on experience. So what I mean by that is you probably want your users to just use the normal login that they log into the computer every morning to be able to access 365. You don't really want your users to need to remember another 365 username and password to access that instance. So to be able to achieve that single sign-on experience, what we can do is we can put in Active Directory Federation services within your environment, or better known as ADFS. And what this will do is act as a proxy to authenticating against your 365 extranet instance. so that your users are able to use their normal login to log into 365. Now, for external users, again, you have a number of choices. You can use a Windows Live account, as I mentioned before, where if you are using a live account, where you're basically outsourcing the whole authentication mechanism to Live so that users can essentially manage their own password, for example. So this is great for kind of ad hoc access for users. You can also use the native 365 login, like the Nintex one you saw before in the workflow action, where you're really responsible for managing your users, but you manage your users through the 365 management console. Alternatively, you can actually manage your external users using your internal Active Directory. So you can create accounts for your external users in your internal Active Directory, and again use ADFS as a proxy for authenticating your external users to Office 365. So as you can see, there's a number of choices that you can take with authentication to really cater for your different requirements. Now, before we finish off, let's just quickly hop back to our demo environment to see if that site's being provisioned now. Okay, great. So you can see now that the Create 365 project site workflow has completed, and it's created a link back to the site in Office 365. So if I click on that link, that will take me back to, or take me through to the 365 instance of that project site. Rather than do that though, I'm just going to click on the actual 365 instance, and if I click refresh, I should find that it's created a entry in the project site directory as part of the workflow. So now as an external user coming into the 365 instance, I can at a glance see all the project sites that are available here and then click through to connect to your typical project site. So that pretty much concludes our presentation for today. We hope it's provided a lot of food for thought, and we'd like to leave you on a note that we do provide some services around assessing whether or not you should be moving into the cloud. So we've got a series of really half and full day services that we can provide to really essentially help you assess whether 365 is the right move for you. So in these workshops, we typically talk about the Office 365 stack, and this isn't exclusive to SharePoint in 365. We can also talk around Link and Exchange. Obviously, we talk about your sign-on requirements and data security and sovereignty, which is obviously a big topic that we haven't really touched on here, but suffice to know that if you are going to invest in 365 in Australia, your data center will be in Singapore. So we do know that a lot of customers have policies around where your data can sit, so that obviously can be a contentious issue. We'll do a cloud feasibility report at the end of those workshops so that you can take back that report and have considered thought around that particular report. And other things that we do is that we can do a full technical environmental analysis where we look at your internal Exchange and your internal Link. So really we're looking at your on-premise capabilities there and whether we need to augment your internal environment or make any modifications to your internal environment so that you are ready for the cloud. Okay, so with that, we'll hop into the Q&A session. So feel free to use the IM console to ask any questions. Okay, looks like we're all sitting in stunned silence today. Well, that's okay. So we hope today's webinar has been informative, and as I said, hope it's provided some food for thought. And we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thanks a lot, guys.